Everyone asks, why didn't the Jedi just hack Order 66? And the honest answer is because Order 66 isn't software, it's brain surgery. The inhibitor chips were neurological implants embedded in clone skulls at the embryonic stage, activated by Palpatine's voice command. You can't Control plus Alt plus delete a soldier's frontal lobe from a server room. But here's the thing, you can hack the ship around them, and that's exactly how Ahsoka Tano survived server room and computer hijacking. When Ahsoka realizes Rex and every clone aboard the Venator-class Star Destroyer has just been turned into her executioner, she doesn't try to reverse the order itself. She does something smarter. She directs astromech droids to slice into the ship's internal systems and turn the entire vessel into a moving maze. Blast doors seal, turbolifts lock, hangar bay clamps release, gravity plating shuts off in select corridors. The clones are still hunting her with absolute lethality, but now they're fragmented into isolated squads, stumbling through a starship that's actively fighting them. That buys time, and time is the one resource she needs to operate on Rex's chip and get him back on her side. Years later, Cal Kestis and his allies infiltrate Fortress Inquisitorius by manipulating life support grids and hull integrity protocols via terminal access. If you control the environment, you can neutralize numerically superior forces in confined spaces, even when you can't touch the soldiers themselves. It's not a reversal of Order 66, it's tactical misdirection at architectural scale. The long-term cost is a forensic signature. Every sliced file, every altered registry, every door you open remotely leaves a data trail that Imperial analysts can reconstruct, which means this method forces you into a clandestine existence where you're perpetually one audit away from exposure. You can't hack your way out of the purge forever. The chips are in the brain, the authority flows from Palpatine, and no amount of clever code can erase that Jedi are now enemies of the state by Imperial law, so computer hijacking isn't a standalone solution. It's a time-buying supplement, best deployed when you're trapped aboard a capital ship where infrastructure gives you leverage. At least you're controlling something. Unlike what comes next, where control isn't the issue, overwhelming force is. Overwhelming martial superiority. Order 66 worked because it combined three elements almost no Jedi could counter simultaneously: proximity, surprise, and massed firepower. Jedi were surrounded by troops they trusted, shot from behind at point-blank range, often with no meaningful reaction window. Aayla Secura was executed by Commander Bly on Felucia. Ki-Adi-Mundi was cut down by the 21st Nova Corps on Megiddo. Both were council-level combatants. Neither got the chance to fight back. Here's the thing, the ones who survived shared a razor-thin advantage. They sensed the betrayal before the clones could pull the trigger. Yoda's escape from Kashyyyk is the purest canon demonstration. As Order 66 rippled through the Force, he felt the disturbance and decapitated Commander Gree and another trooper before they could fire. Then he used Wookiee allies in jungle terrain to break contact and extract off-world. Superior Force sensitivity granted early warning. Superior combat skill neutralized the immediate shooters. Situational awareness let him exploit allies and environment to disappear. But even that level of mastery rarely saved the master themselves. Depa Billaba held off multiple clone squads long enough for Padawan Caleb Dume to flee, cutting down attackers in wave after wave until she was overwhelmed. Jaro Tapal fought through his entire Venator, sealing blast doors, absorbing blaster fire, shepherding Cal Kestis toward an escape shuttle before dying. Both demonstrate that martial superiority can create survival windows for others even when it cannot save you. The clones were tactically lethal under chip control because they coordinated through drilled unit formation and shared targeting, firing in volleys with zero hesitation. A Jedi who could rapidly eliminate squad leaders, seize high ground, or break line of sight could fragment the engagement into smaller skirmishes where individual skill mattered more than massed fire. The problem is that even the greatest swordsmen tire, and no single Jedi can counter an entire legion for long. The long-term cost is profound psychological damage. Surviving by killing soldiers you named as trusted comrades merges the trauma of betrayal with the guilt of lethal retaliation. Kanan Jarrus struggles for years to accept the role of Jedi teacher, burdened by memories of Depa Billaba's last stand. Yoda and Obi-Wan both exhibit deep melancholy over the fall of the Order, even decades later. At least those who survived on the ground had terrain to work with. If you were in a starfighter when the Order came through, your options got a lot simpler and a lot worse. Starfighter ejection and space escape. Once you survive the initial clone turn and reclaim your legs, Galaxy's sheer scale becomes your greatest weapon. A small hyperspace-capable craft can move a survivor beyond the immediate operational theater of every clone who received Order 66 within minutes. The moment you hit hyperspace, every trooper on that planet becomes irrelevant. They're stuck in a single system. You're not. Obi-Wan Kenobi's escape from Utapau is the gold standard. Commander Cody ordered a cannon crew to blast him off a cliffside while he was riding his Varactyl, and Cody assumed the fall killed him. It didn't. Obi-Wan survived, evaded patrols, infiltrated the landing zone, and commandeered General Grievous's personal starfighter, the Soulless One. That ship was hyperspace capable, had a fully loaded Navi computer, and let him break contact with the entire Outer Rim campaign in one jump. The tactical chain is is simple: survive the assassination attempt, disappear from line of sight, infiltrate a relatively unguarded docking bay, and seize a fighter with intact hyperdrive. Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex followed similar logic, escaping the crashing tribunal. After Ahsoka removed Rex's inhibitor chip and fought their way to the hangar, they discovered Maul had already stolen the primary shuttle. Forced to improvise, Ahsoka piloted a Y-wing off the plummeting ship with Rex's gunner, riding the explosion into space before crash landing on a nearby moon. The method works, but it requires fine-tuned piloting under extreme pressure and intimate knowledge of starfighter system. But being in a cockpit is not automatically an advantage. Plo Koon was shot down in his own starfighter with zero chance to react, his ARC-170 exploding over Cato Neimoidia the instant his wingmen received the order. The method only works when the Jedi controls the craft before the order hits and can reach hyperspace before orbital gun crews or tractor beams respond. The long-term cost is life as a hunted fugitive. Imperial Star Destroyers maintain transponder registries and can flag known Jedi vessels, forcing survivors to abandon or heavily modify their ships constantly. Ahsoka stages a mass burial on the crash moon and leaves a lightsaber behind as her own grave marker. Obi-Wan enters decades of exile on Tatooine. Space escape solves the immediate kill zone, but it forces survivors to abandon the battlefield and the community they were sworn to defend. You live, everyone else doesn't. At least you're still breathing, which is more than you can say for the clones who might have helped you if their chips hadn't turned them into executioners first. Clone assistance and inhibitor chip removal. The behavioral modification biochips were surgically implanted into every clone embryo on Kamino. When Palpatine said execute Order 66, those chips activated and rewired the clones' brains in real time, reframing every Jedi they'd served beside as a traitor who had to be eliminated immediately. Years of battlefield bonds overridden by 3 words and a piece of hardware smaller than a fingernail. ARC Trooper 5's figured this out before anyone else. He investigated a clone who prematurely tried to kill a Jedi, traced the problem back to the chips, and uncovered that every single clone in the Grand Army had one. He tried to warn the Jedi Council, and he was shot dead and dismissed as mentally unstable before the truth could reach anyone. Fives died knowing he was right and knowing nobody believed him. Years later, his discovery saved 2 lives during the final moments of the Clone Wars. Aboard the Venator-class Star Destroyer Tribunal, Ahsoka Tano is trapped with an entire crew of clones who have just received Order 66. Captain Rex turns his blasters on her, but Rex is fighting it. He's screaming at her to find Fives, to find out what he discovered, because something is forcing him to kill her and he can't stop it. Ahsoka stuns him, uses astromech droids to scan his brain, locate the chip, and performs emergency surgery with shipboard medical equipment while the entire ship is trying to murder her. The moment that chip comes out, Rex snaps back, full agency. He immediately starts fighting his own clone brothers to protect Ahsoka. That's the cleanest proof in all of Star Wars canon that the enemy force can be converted back into an ally mid-crisis. The clones aren't the enemy. The chips or Clone Officer Gray experienced something similar during Order 66. He led the attack on Depa Billaba and her Padawan Caleb Dume, but later, as the chip's influence weakened, he began questioning why he'd blindly obeyed. He eventually sacrificed himself to let Caleb escape Imperial pursuit, effectively overriding the chip through sheer force of will. Rex, Wolf, and Gregor all had their chips removed after the war and lived as semi-retired fugitives, aiding the Ghost Crew years into the Purge. Here's the problem. This method is extraordinarily rare under combat conditions because you need medical scanning equipment capable of mapping a clone's brain in real time, the time and space to perform surgery while every other clone is actively trying to kill you, and a bond strong enough that you're willing to trust him the second his chip comes out. Most Jedi didn't have that. Most didn't even know the chips existed. The long-term cost is shared trauma. Rex is haunted by what he did under the chip's control. He tried to kill Ahsoka, and even though he wasn't fully in control, he remembers all of it. Both of them carry the weight of what happened between them. Neither of them ever fully lets it go. But if you think saving one clone is difficult, wait until you hear about the Jedi who survived by pretending to be dead and buried among thousands of corpses, feigning death and mass grave. The tactical logic is elegant. If the Empire believes a specific Jedi is dead, they stop hunting that specific Jedi. Order 66's scale created enormous statistical cover because the near total slaughter made individual survival implausible enough that a convincing death scene could be accepted without serious investigation. You didn't need to prove you died. You just needed to look like you probably died, which in the middle of a galaxy-wide massacre is not a difficult sell. Ahsoka Tano and Rex return to the Tribunal crash site. After barely escaping a Y-wing, they construct a mass grave for the fallen clones, arranging helmets and armor as markers. Then Ahsoka leaves one of her own lightsabers among the helmets. A crashed Republic ship, a field of clone bodies, and a Jedi weapon left behind. The implication is clear. She was there, the ship went down, here's her weapon. The deception works because it aligns with Imperial expectations about what happens to a Jedi trapped on a mutinous, crashing ship. But if you think staging your own funeral with a prop lightsaber sounds elegant, Reva Savander's survival is the exact opposite. She survives the Temple Massacre during Operation Nightfall by playing dead among the bodies of younglings slaughtered by Anakin Skywalker. This is the most viscerally horrifying application of the tactic. Survival means lying motionless in a pile of dead children and waiting for the killer to leave. No dramatic escape, no last stand, just absolute stillness in a room full of corpses while the man who murdered everyone around you walks past checking for survivors. Caleb Dumish vanishes after Depa Bilyaba's death, changes his name to Kanan Jarrus, and makes no effort to correct any assumption that he died alongside her forces. The broader Imperial narrative that the Jedi were exterminated almost completely creates passive cover for individuals who can avoid drawing tension. If the Empire thinks 99% of the Jedi are dead, they're not going to spend resources hunting down every single name on the old temple rolls. You just need to stay quiet enough that no one bothers to double check. The long-term cost is permanent severance from one's old life. Ahsoka's graveside ceremony is as much a funeral for her own past as for the clone. Leaving the lightsaber is a deliberate severing of her visible identity. The survivor walking the galaxy afterward is effectively a ghost tolerated by history, only because history believes them already gone. You're not hiding, you're posthumous. But if you think erasing your name from the Imperial kill list is extreme, wait until you see what happens when you erase the Force itself from your daily life, relinquishing the Force and civilian disguise. The Inquisitorius is trained specifically to sense and track Force signatures. Every time a Jedi uses their powers in public, they're broadcasting their location to the Empire's most dangerous hunters. The solution is simple in theory and devastating in practice. Suppress Force use entirely, abandon the robes and lightsaber, and bury yourself in the galaxy's civilian population. Go electromagnetically silent in the Force. Disappear into the noise. Kanan Jarrus is the template. Born Caleb Dume, he survives Order 66 thanks to his master's sacrifice, then spends years drifting from job to job on the fringes of the galaxy. He cuts his hair, changes his clothing, carries his lightsaber in a concealed two-piece configuration that looks like ordinary equipment, and studiously avoids using the Force in public. For years, he refuses to intervene in injustices that would require Jedi power. His survival depends entirely on his willingness to live as a non-Jedi. Cal Kestis follows the same playbook. After escaping as a Padawan, he works in a starship scrapyard on Bracca, using only mundane physical abilities for dangerous manual labor. Then a co-worker falls to his death, and Cal instinctively uses the Force to save him. That single reflexive act of compassion summons the second sister. Years of careful concealment blown in minutes because he couldn't let someone die. That's the central cruelty of this method. The more Jedi you are, the less safe you are. Obi-Wan Kenobi goes to ground on Tatooine as Ben, engaging minimally with locals, rarely touching the Force. Ahsoka Tano works as a farmhand and mechanic under the name Ashla, then later as the rebel informant Fulcrum, using clandestine communication networks instead of Jedi heroics. Every one of these survivors limits overt Force use and trusts in anonymity and non-Force skills rather than the abilities that once defined them. They become tradespeople, laborers, hermits, anything but what they actually are. The long-term cost is one of the heaviest psychological burdens in the entire spectrum. Being a Jedi is an identity intertwined with your relationship to the Force, the Temple, and a lifelong code of conduct. To survive by relinquishing that identity is to live in continuous self-denial. Every time you walk past an injustice without intervening, you have to justify your restraint as necessary for a greater good. Kanan doubts his worthiness to train Ezra, believing he abandoned the Jedi way for too long. Cal's re-engagement with the Force is driven by trauma and fear. Obi-Wan's years on Tatooine are marked by depression, isolation, and unresolved grief. The question isn't just can you survive by pretending not to be yourself, it's how long can you do it before you forget who you were. Some never come back, they die in hiding, never lighting their saber again. They survive Order 66 only to lose the war against their own guilt, but at least they're alive to fight that war. Unlike the ones who chose exile so remote that not even guilt could follow them there. Remote planetary exile, geographic concealment attacks the detection problem at its root. Imperial resources are finite, and a planet that is strategically worthless, economically unproductive, and physically hostile will receive minimal attention from the systematic purge apparatus. The trick is finding a world remote enough to be ignored but survivable enough not to simply kill you through environmental attrition. Yoda chooses Dagobah specifically because the planet's dense life forms and powerful dark side nexus embodied in the cave effectively camouflage his Force signature. Canon sources explain that this dark side presence makes it difficult even for Sidious to sense him directly. Dagobah becomes one of the few places in the galaxy where a living Jedi Grand Master can hide in plain Force sight. The The planet isn't just remote, it's a forced camouflage system. Obi-Wan's choice of Tatooine operates on a more mundane logic. As an outer rim desert world ruled by the Hutts, it lies at the fringes of Imperial concern. Living as a reclusive hermit in the Jundland Waste places him close enough to watch over Luke Skywalker, while remaining far from Imperial commerce lanes. The sheer physical hostility of the desert serves as a passive defense because searching every canyon and moisture farm would be a poor use of Imperial military resources. Nobody cares about Tatooine, which makes it perfect. Many neutral or underdeveloped planets in the Outer Rim and wild space provided sanctuary after Order 66 precisely because Imperial control there was thin and economically unrewarding. These worlds became low priorities for systematic purges. For survivors of less exalted stature than Yoda or Obi-Wan, remote exile is often a default rather than a deliberate strategy. They flee to a backwater because it is the only place they can disappear. Here's where it gets brutal. The long-term cost is approximately 2 decades of solitude. Yoda spends nearly 20 years alone on Dagobah with no students, no colleagues, and no community, meditating on the failures of the Jedi Order and waiting for the emergence of the next generation. Obi-Wan's Tatooine exile is similarly marked by isolation and unresolved grief, with his primary emotional anchor being silent, distant guardianship of a child he cannot approach. Both men accept that countless beings will suffer under the Empire's reign and that they will not intervene. They bet everything on a single long-term generational gamble. They watch the galaxy burn and do nothing because doing anything would expose the people they're trying to protect. It's strategic, it's elegant, and it's absolutely agonizing. But if you think 20 years of meditation and sand is the darkest path a survivor could take, you haven't met the ones who decided that the best way to survive the Empire was to join it, embracing the dark side. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit about Order 66. The Empire didn't just want to kill you. They wanted to turn you. Because the people best qualified to hunt Jedi are Jedi. And if you were willing to cross that line, to survive by becoming the very thing that destroyed your order, the same regime that wanted you dead would now protect you, arm you, and give you access to every hyperlane in the galaxy. You'd move from the kill list to the payroll, from prey to predator. Reva Savander survived the Temple Massacre during Operation Nightfall by playing dead among the slaughtered youngling. She lay there, surrounded by the bodies of children she'd trained with, while Anakin Skywalker carved through the halls above her. When it was over, she was discovered, and instead of being executed, she was recruited into the Inquisitorius. She became the third sister. Her survival in that initial moment was feigning death. Her long-term survival was the dark side, and she spent years hunting other Jedi, torturing them, killing them, all while secretly plotting to get close enough to Vader to strike him down. But to get there, she had to become exactly what the Empire needed her to be. A weapon pointed at her former family. The Grand Inquisitor followed the same path. He was a Jedi Temple guard, tasked with protecting the Order, and he survived the Purge by turning his back on everything he'd sworn to defend. He became the Empire's primary Jedi hunter. The Inquisitorius as a whole is composed largely of former Jedi and Padawans who survived Order 66 and were either recruited or coerced into serving the regime. They used their knowledge of Jedi training, Jedi tactics, and Jedi psychology to make them devastatingly effective at hunting former brothers and sisters. They know how you think, they know where you'd hide. They know what weaknesses to exploit, because those same weaknesses used to be theirs. The Emperor and Vader deliberately foster a culture of fear and competition among the Inquisitors. Failure is punished severely. Success earns only temporary favor, and Vader himself kills Inquisitors who become inconvenient or who step out of line. This creates a survival paradox. You live by hunting others, but you are always one misstep away from becoming prey to your own masters. You didn't escape the Empire, you just bought yourself a slightly longer leash. The long-term cost is moral and spiritual annihilation. In exchange for their lives, the survivors become instruments of the very order that destroyed their peers and the ideals they once served. Reva's arc ends with her gravely wounded, forced to confront whether revenge was worth what she became. The Grand Inquisitor dies violently. Many other Inquisitors are killed by Jedi, rebels, or Vader himself. Surviving Order 66 by embracing the darks doesn't mean you avoided death. It just means you postponed it. At the cost of everything you once were, at least you got to breathe for a few more years, which is more than most Jedi can say. But if you think becoming a dark side enforcer is the worst survival strategy on this list, wait until you see the one that requires you to stop being human, entirely domiciled mechanical fortification. Every other method on this list relies on movement, disguise psychology, or moral compromise. This one bets entirely on architecture. If the Empire cannot find you, or cannot breach where you are, you survive by making yourself a fixed but invisible target, substituting engineered defenses and technological concealment for mobility or identity chain. The Legends Jedi asteroid base is the most fully realized example of this approach. Hidden inside an atmospheric storm within an asteroid, protected by violent weather patterns and perpetual electromagnetic interference that render it nearly undetectable and nearly unapproachable without precise coordinates, it functions as a sanctuary sanctuary where Jedi fugitives could regroup, train, and plan resistance. The Hidden Path network hinted at in canon uses a similar logic via sealed tunnels, concealed compartments, and fortified safe houses to move Jedi and Force-sensitive children through Imperial space. Build walls high enough and nobody can touch you. Makes sense on paper, but here's where it gets dark. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant before Order 66 was the most heavily fortified Jedi structure in the entire galaxy. Temple guards, layered security systems, restricted archives, access codes known only to members of the Order. Thousands of years of institutional paranoia distilled into stone and technology. An operation. Faltfall destroyed it anyway. Because Anakin Skywalker had the access codes and led the 501st Legion personally. No fortress survives internal betrayal. And the stronger your defense is, the more catastrophically they fail when someone inside opens the gate. Static fortifications are double-edged. They provide a sense of security and allow training, meditation, and community to continue, but they create fixed targets that can be besieged, bombarded, or blockaded once discovered. The bigger and more sophisticated the base, the more logistical supply chains it requires. And every supply chain is a potential leak trail that Imperial intelligence can follow back to the source. One intercepted cargo crate, one talkative supplier, one captured courier. That's all it takes. The long-term cost is a form of gilded imprisonment and potential institutional repetition. Inhabitants may be physically safe, but venturing outside risks detection, making them dependent on the fortress for everything. Over time, insular fortified communities can become disconnected from the wider galaxy's suffering. A miniature recreation of the Jedi Order's pre-war isolation that contributed to its inability to perceive the Sith conspiracy forming around it. The method that promises the most security may ultimately recreate the exact conditions that made the Order vulnerable in the first place. Canon evidence for this method during the immediate execution of Order 66 is thin. More examples exist of fortifications failing than a fortification saving anyone in the first wave of clone betrayal. It becomes more viable in the extended Purge era as a late-phase supplementary strategy. Small groups have already escaped and have resources to build or occupy a hidden refuge, which is why it sits at the far end of the tactical escalation spectrum. The endpoint of every other method on this list, the place survivors end up when they have run out of places to run. A hidden fortress of isolated Jedi survivors cut off from the galaxy, training in secret, waiting for better days. Sounds exactly like what the Jedi Order was doing before this whole disaster started. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.